Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marudastunandi Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sankapadakramopanishadaihi Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyandi Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidussura Suraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha Om Sudis Smritipurananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. So in the last session we already touched upon some aspects of Shankara's commentary on the 11th verse of the second chapter. That's the beginning of Shankara's Bhashyam or commentary proper. In this context, it may be relevant if we listen to the introduction by Anandagiri, who introduces Shankara's commentary with some very important observations in connection with the structure of Bhagavad Gita as a scriptural text. Anandagiri says, Vrittikudam abhiprayam pratyakhyaya swabhipreda shastrartha samarthitah samprati ashocyan ityasmat praktana grandhasandarbhasya praduktam tattvaryartham anudya ashocyan ityadihi sudharmam apichaveksha itedadandasya samudayasya tattvaryartham aha tatra iti. So, Bhashyagara clearly established the fact that the highest liberation, moksha, is only through pure jnana. That point has been very clearly established. So, abhiprayataha shastrarthaha samarthitaha. And in the course of establishing his view, he also effectively refuted the views of Vrittikara Matam is called. Mostly he is referring to the Jnana Karma Samuchayavada, which was prevalent during the Bhashyagara's time. According to Jnana Karma Samuchayavada, the highest realization is possible by combining Jnanam and Karma together. Which means even after realizing the highest spiritual truth, one should continue the practice of rituals. But Bhashyagara says that this is not correct. The highest liberation is possible only through pure knowledge. And after one attains pure knowledge or Advaita Anubhuti, it is not necessary for one to continue the practice of karma. Even if a realized person like Janaka continues his practice of karma or performance of duties and responsibilities, it will be only for the good of the world. And if anyone is dedicated to the practice of karma as a means to attain Chitta Shuddhi and then Jnana Prapti and liberation or moksha, in that case, karma only takes us up to the point of Chitta Shuddhi or purification of the mind. It is not at all necessary, it is not at all mandatory for a realized person to continue the practice of karma. This is the view of Advaitis. So, Vrittikudam abhiprayam pratyakhyaya swabhipreda shastrartha samarthitaha samprati ashocyan ityasmat praktana gandhasandarbhasya praduktam tattvaryartham anudya ashocyan ityadehi sudharmam apichaveksha itedadandasya samudayasya tattvaryartham aha tatra iti. So, from 11th verse of the second chapter up to the 31st verse, that is Swadharmam Abhichaveksha Na Vigambidum Arhadi, etc. The Bhashyara says that is a particular text which is going to be discussed in the coming sessions. Atrahi Shastre Trini Kantani Ashtadasha Sankhyaganam Adhyayanam Shatkat Tridayam Upadaya Traividhyat Tatra Purvashatkatmagam Purvakandam Tampadartham Vishayikaroti. Now, according to traditional scholars, the whole text of Bhagavad Gita is divided into 3 kandas, kanda trayam, 3 sections. Each section having 6 chapters. So the first chapter to 6th chapter, including that is called Purvakandam, then up to 12th Madhyama Kandam, from 13th up to 18th Antima Kandam. So each of these kandas have some integral relationship with the Mahavakya Tattum Asi. It is a Mahavakya that is expounded in the Chandogya Upanishad in the 6th chapter in the form of a dialogue between Uddalaka and Shvetaketu. So here, Tatra Purvashatkatmagam Purvakandam Tam Padartham Vishayikaroti Madhyama Shatkarupam Madhyama Kandam Tat Padartham Golcharayati. So the second kanda, having 6 chapters, deal with Tat Padartha Andima Shatka Lakshanam Andimam Kandam Padarthayohu Aikyam Bhakyartham Adhigaroti. The third kanda, that is from 13 to 18 chapter, this particular section deals with the Padarthayohu Aikyam, that is Asi, the identity or the unity between Tum and Tat Padarthas. After this, we will continue the discussion with the second part of this. Towards the end of this Bhashya, the Bhashya on the 11th verse, the Purvapakshin asked one question: Kutaha te asocyaha yatu nityaha katham? It's a reference to what we already discussed in the last part of the last section in the Bhashya. So, towards the end of the Bhashya on 11th verse, the Bhashyakara says, Panta Atma Vishaya Buddhi Yesham Tehi Pantitaha Panditya Nirvidya Iti Sudehi. So, who is a Pantita? Pantita is a person who has got true knowledge, Atma Jnanam. So, it is Atma Jnanam that makes a person a Pantita, a knowledgeable person. Paramartha tu Nityan Ashuchyan Anushocasi Ato Mudhaga Asi Iti Abhiprayaka. So, the Bhashyakara has already made it very clear. He says that Arjuna has absolutely no reason at all to worry about either Bhishma or Drona or any of the elders. From a purely empirical point of view, from a worldly perspective, they are extremely well-educated, knowledgeable people. Bhishma and Drona are far superior to Arjuna in the knowledge of Shruti, Smriti and Puranas and other scriptures. So they know perfectly well what they are doing. They are not in need of any instruction or education. In fact, they are much better informed and knowledgeable than Arjuna himself. That's from a purely empirical Vyavaharika perspective. From a Paramarthika perspective, they are the Atman. The Atman is Nitya. Atman is Sarvikara Atita. It doesn't undergo any of the changes like Jayate, Asti, Vardhate, Viparinamade, Apakshiyade, Vinashyati. Atman is not born because birth indicates a transition from a state of relative non-existence into a state of existence. Atman always exists, so it cannot come into existence, so it has no birth. And Atman can never cease to exist, so it has no death. So Atman is beyond Sarvikaras, 6 changes. Jayade, Asti, Vardhati, Viparinamade, Apakshiyade, Vinashyati. Birth, existence, growth, evolution, decay and death. none of these changes affects the Atman. Atman is Trigala Apatita. Atman remains the same, unaffected by the changes in the past, in present and future. It's beyond time, beyond space, beyond causation. So Atman is Nitya. And in fact, in true nature, in reality, Bhishma and Drona are not the physical bodies or physical mechanisms. They are the Atman. So there is no reason at all for you to worry about them. So when Bhashyakara stated this, the Purva Pakshin asked one question. Kutaha te ashochyaha yataha nityaha katham? How do they become beyond grief? Why? What's the reason why Arjuna need not worry about them, need not have any grief over them? Because they are nityas, they are eternal, they are immortal, they are beyond time, space and causation. How? What's the reason for this statement? So this is how the Bhashyakara connects the 11th verse to the 12th one. So the 12th verse is Natvevaham jadunasam nattum neme janadhipaha nachaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayamatah param. So the 12th verse tells us that this Atman always exists, always existed and will always exist. So there was never a time when this Atman did not exist, and it always exists. There will be no time when this Atman will not exist. It is eternal. So the literal translation of this verse is Aham tu jatu na asam iti na eva. Not that there was a time when I did not exist. There was no time when I did not exist. Tvam na asihi iti na. And there was no time when you did not exist. Ime janatipaha na asanna. These kings, janatipaha, na asanna. There was no time when these kings did not exist. Sarve vayam atah param na bhavishyamaha iti naeva. And we are not going to cease to exist in future either. There will be no time when we will not exist. That means you, myself and these kings always existed, exist now and will always exist. That's our true nature. Not as this body, not as this body mind complex, but as the Atman, as the eternal Atman, which is time, which is beyond time, space and causation, which is eternal, which is immortal. We always existed, we will always exist. So what is the justification for your grief? This is the literal meaning of this verse. Now the Bhashya begins. Natu eva jatu kadajit aham na asam kintu asam eva atiteshu dehotpatti vinasheshu nityam eva aham asam iti abhiprayaka. So, never was there a time or a state when I did not exist. The reason is, I always existed. There was no time when I did not exist. So what's the meaning? The meaning is that when the body comes to an end, when deaths happen, I do not cease to exist. That is at the time of Dehotpatti and Vinasha. When the body comes into existence, I do not come into existence because I, the Atman, the all-pervading Brahman, always existed. Therefore, I do not come into existence when I am born. I am beyond birth. And I do not cease to exist when I die because I am beyond death. That's my true nature. So then what happens to birth and death, that is only a series of changes: birth, existence, growth, evolution, decay and death. These changes are related only to the body and not to the Atman. This is the true implication of this particular term. Tatha natvam na asihi kintu asihi eva. And not only that, similarly, there was no time, there was never a stage when you did not exist, for you always existed. You the Atman, just as I the Atman, always existed, always existing, and will always exist, will never cease to exist. So there was no time when these kings, when these great leaders of men and women, when they did not exist. They always existed and they will always exist. There will be no time when they will not exist. Sarve vayam ataha asma deha vinashat param uttaragaliya vitrishu apikaryeshu nityaha. So, asma deha vinashat param uttaragaliya api. So even after the end, after the body is destroyed, even after the so-called death, which is nothing but a change that happens, and the change is something that happens only to the body, not to the Atman. Therefore, the Atman, will always exist, existing in all the three times, in the past, present and future. Atmaswarupena ityartha, nityaha atmaswarupena ityartha. We can claim to be nitya only in the highest paramarthika sense. Deha bhedana vritya bhagavajanam na atma bheda viprayena. So then bhagavajana is used here, I mean the plural term is used here, because the reference is to plural number, because the reference to several bodies, because we go through several lives one after another, as bodies, as body-mind complexes, we may come and go, so the plural term is used, but Atman is the same in all the three senses. So that's the idea behind. So in Vedanta, the word Nitya or Satyam, these terms are used with a specific sense. Anything that undergoes any change at any time cannot be called Nitya. Nitya is that which is eternal, which is beyond change, which always existed and will always exist, which means it's beyond the six changes which we already referred to. And Nitya is something that exists without any change in the past, present and future. And Nitya is the same in the waking state, in dream state and deep sleep state. So Trigara Abadhidatvam, Shabhigara Adidatvam and Trigara Avasthatraya Adidatvam. Avasthatraya Abadhidatvam. These are the essential characteristics of anything that we consider to be Nitya or real in the absolute sense of the term. Now, Vedanta does not reject the idea of other aspects of God. So, according to Vedanta, the highest concept of God is one eternal, immanent, omnipresent, transcendental reality, which is Atman or Brahman. Still, the other categories in the evolution of God are not rejected by Vedanta or Advaita. Only Advaita points out that as we evolve in our spiritual life, our idea of God also evolves. So long as the world is real, you have to accept a creator God as the reality. But the moment we understand the relativity of the world, the moment we realize the fact the world is only relative entity, then our idea of God also goes beyond the God, the Creator. Then we realize that the highest concept of God is one Atman that is present, immanent in everything, and which is present everywhere. So Advaita presents the highest concept in the evolution of Godhood. Beyond pantheism, which is the beginning of the evolution of the idea of God, where we equate God with nature. Pantheism, where we realize there is a spirit immanent within everything in this world. And then polytheism, where we conceive of a God behind every natural phenomenon. And a monotheism, where we accept one supreme deity, the Creator God, who is the supreme creator and who is the governor, the ruler of the whole creation. And monism, which talks about, it deals with the idea that the highest idea of the absolute reality is one impersonal, attributeless reality. So all ideas are accepted by Vedanta or Advaita, but according to Advaita proper, as we evolve towards higher and higher levels of our spiritual growth, we slowly reach realize the fact, not just believe it, but we realize the fact that God lives within everyone and God is present everywhere, and that God is one attributeless, impersonal, nirguna, niragara, nitya reality, one divine principle that is immanent and also omnipresent. That's why Bhashyam says, Apitrishu apikaleshu nityaha atma surubena ityarthaha. When we interpret ourselves as the Atman, then we realize that we have no birth and we have no death. We are beyond the 6 changes. Now, in this context, perhaps it is important for us to give a bird view of the concept of reality in Vedanta. In Vedanta, the highest reality, the peak of our concept of reality is Paramarthika Satta. And that Paramarthika Satta is the one without a second, Ekam Advayam, Atman or Brahman. As I mentioned, it is Nitya, it is beyond birth, beyond death. Below this highest concept of the absolute reality, there are different levels. Below this, the Vyavaharika level, the empirical level. At empirical level, this world, all that we see around us, all is belong to the empirical level. Vedanta doesn't say that this world is absolutely unreal. Vedanta only tells us that the world is not absolutely real. That's a very important point to remember. Shankara or the Advaita philosophy never makes a statement that this world is absolutely unreal. What Vedanta says, what Sri Shankaracharya states is that this world in which we live, which we interact with, of which we are a part, is a world of changes. It goes on changing. Maybe the whole creation, the cosmos, may exist for several billions of years. An insect may exist for a few minutes. Both belong to time. And both are non-eternal because they undergo changes from time to time. So anything that undergoes change, any kind of change, is not absolutely real, but certainly not absolutely unreal. It is real only in the relative sense. So this world belongs to the Vyavaharika Satta. It is relatively real, not absolutely real, but not absolutely unreal either. Below this Vyavaharika level, there is another concept where we may mistake one for the other. For example, when there is not enough light in a room, when we see an object lying curved, somewhat dark in color, we may mistake that object to be a snake. That's because we have seen a snake maybe in the zoo or in the forests. And when we see the object in a dimly light room, when there is not enough light, we may mistake that object to be a snake. Actually, it's a rope. When we bring light, what happens? The light doesn't necessarily create a rope. The light only removes the darkness that stood in the way of our realizing the fact that it was a rope. So we mistook the rope for the snake, because the snake idea existed in our mind. So the snake is not absolutely unreal, because the snake, though the snake does not exist in the room, it exists somewhere else, maybe in the forest or in the zoo. So something that we remember in our mind, that exists in our memory because of previous experience, we superimpose upon something else. So here the snake is only pradibhasika satta. Or maybe we may mistake an expanse of sand for a pool of water, marumarichika. Or we may mistake mother of pearl, something that lies on the seashore, which is very brilliant, which looks like a silver. It's not a silver. We may mistake it for a silver. So all these wrong misconceptions are possible, because we are not able to see the real object. So the mother of pearl is mistaken to be silver. A desert or a well-paved road under the blazing sun may be mistaken for a pool of water, or a rope may be mistaken to be a snake. The rope could be mistaken as a sarpa, jaradhara, bhuchitra, or maybe danda. These are the possible misunderstandings that may emerge in our mind when we see an object that is lying in a dim lit room, because there is not enough light. So it may be mistaken to be a snake, a piece of rope, a piece of stick. Perhaps it may be mistaken to be thin stream of water, jaradhara, or maybe a crack on the floor, bhuchitra. So the rope may be mistaken to be the rope will be mistaken to be a snake. Snake is not totally unreal. Snake exists somewhere, but it's not there exactly. For all these misunderstandings, there should be a foundation. We mistake the rope for a snake, but without a rope, we won't mistake the rope for a snake. We may mistake a desert for a pool of water, but the desert is there. The pool of water is not there. So, for all these wrong notions, there is a foundation of reality. Only the reality is not recognized to be real. Now, there is at the other end of the spectrum, there is something which is obviously a self-contradiction, which is absolutely unreal. So, Vedanta gives the examples of Adhyaputra, Kapushpa, Gandharvanagara, Jasavishana, etc. Maybe the child may imagine there is a city, or maybe a number of shops and markets in the sky in the evening when there is brilliant light. When a child is looking at the sky, he may mistake the sky to be a well-illumined city. These are possible imaginations, they are totally unreal. Sasavishana, the horns of hare. Kapushpa, we imagine there is a garden of flowers in the sky. And maybe the son of a barren woman. All these are absolutely unreal, because the very term itself involves an obvious contradiction. So these are four levels of looking at reality. At the one end, there is the absolutely unreal reality. The absolute reality, that is Brahman or Atman. But at the other end, there is absolute unreality, like Kapushpa or Gandharvanagara, etc. Then between these two, there is the Vyavaharika Satta, this world and all these empirical experiences. Then there is a Pratibhasika Satta, where we may mistake a rope for a snake. The snake is a Pratibhasika entity. We may mistake a mother of pearl for a silver. The silver is actually not real. And again we may mistake a desert for a pool of water. In fact, a pool of water is a Pratibhasika sometimes. So these are four levels of reality. So here Bhashyakara says, in reality, our true nature is that we are the Atman. The Paramarthika Satta dimension of our personality is that we are the Atman, the eternal, the unchanging, the everlasting reality. Then this body, this mind, and all these empirical experiences, they are real only in the relative sense. They are not real in the absolute sense. So that's an important point to remember. In a way, these ideas are related to some of the famous Upanishadic statements like Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, or maybe it's also related to certain important Vedantic statements, So all those ideas are explained here. Now, Bhashyakara establishes the fact of Advaita according to some old traditional interpretations. And that's very important in this context. According to traditional scholars, there are 6 or rather 7 criteria by which we establish the central theme or the central topic of a text. Is called Talparya Nirnaya. So, Upakrama Upasamkhara Abhyasa Apurvada Phalam Arthavadu Upapatti cha Lingam Talparya Nirnaya. Originally this was stated by Kumarila Bhatta in his Sloka Vartika. So Kumarila Bhatta says there are 6 criteria by which we determine the central theme of a text. Upakrama, the beginning. The Upakrama of Gita, according to traditional scholars, is Ashuchyan. That's the Upakrama. And it comes in on the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter. So the Upakrama sloka of Bhagavad Gita is Ashuchyan Annashojastam Prajnavadam Sabhasase. Gadasu nagadasumsa na anuchojanti panditaha. The 11th verse of the 2nd chapter. And Upasamkhara sloka is the 66th verse. Ma suja sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja aham tva sarvapapebhyo mokshayishyami ma suja. So the Upakrama states these Bhishma Dronateka are Ashuchya. Ashuchya, I mean, you need not really have any grief about them. And Upasamhara is Masuja, do not grieve. That comes in the 66th sloka of 18th chapter. So Upasamhara and Upakrama together indicate the fact that Atma Jnanam is the central theme of the text. It was a lack of Atma Jnanam, or rather it was Dehatma Buddhi, that made Arjuna worry about his duties, responsibilities. Worry about, oh, when I do my duty as a soldier, then I will be doing a lot of harm to these people, because he mistook them to be psychophysical mechanisms or body-mind complexes. He looked upon as Dehatma Buddhi. So that is the Ajnana. And once you get Jnanam, then you get out of this grief. So Arjuna's grief was due to ignorance, and the remedy was Atma Jnana. And when Arjuna got this Atma Jnanam, he said, Karishe Vachanam Tava Nashto Moha Smritir Labdha Tattvasadat Maya Achyuta Stidosmi Gada Sandeha Karishe Vachanam Tava. So the second chapter is in a way considered to be a summary of all important topics of Bhagavad Gita. Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, Atma Jnanam, Bhakti Yoga, all these are summarized in the second chapter. So the Bhashyakara establishes on the 11th verse itself in his commentary that our true nature is that we are the Atman, the absolute reality, which has been established in the great scriptures like Chandogya Upanishad, Sarvam Khavidam Brahma, and Mandukya Upanishad, Sarvam Hyedat Brahma. All these great Vedantic statements, Upanishadic statements, have been indicated in this Bhashya on the 12th sloka of the second chapter, Natvevaham Jatunasam. Now we will turn to the 13th verse. Tatra katham iva nitya atma iti dushtantamaha. Now, how do we make the statement that this atma is nitya? How does atma become nitya? So that is discussed in the Bhashya in the 13th verse. Dehinosmin yatha dehi kaumaram yavvanam jara tatha dehandra praptihi dhiras tatra namuhyati. Dehinaha asmin dehi yatha kaumaram yavvanam jara tatha dehandra praptihi tatra dhiraha namuhyati. So the verse says, in this body which undergoes changes, these changes like childhood, youth, middle age, old age, death, and so on. These changes take place in body. If you look upon this body, then birth is the beginning of everything and death is the end of everything. So the great teacher Lord Krishna slowly takes Arjuna to this realization that this body and this world, this empirical life, is only an incidental relative entity. If you look upon this body as the only entity, then you have to believe like Charvakas. Charvakas believe that this body or what is perceived at the sensory level is the only entity. Dehamatram Atma iti Charvakaha. Charu Loka Sukhavaka Vakyam Vachanam Yasya Charvakaha. So, who is a Charvaka? They talk wonderful things. They talk only about this body. They talk only about empirical worldly enjoyments. So, according to them, the highest reality, the Atman, is this body. Dehamatram Atma. That's the belief of Charvakas. And then, of course, among Charvakas, there are called Ekadeshis, called Ekadesi school of Charvakas. They believe that Indriya, Mana, Prana, and Deha, they are all constitute together. Just body-mind complex is the only entity. Among Vijnanavadins, on the other hand, is school of subjective idealists, the Bauddhas, they believe Kshanika Vijnanam is Atma. The Vijnanam is the only Atman. And according to Digambaras, they believe Dekha, the Vidirikta Sthira Dekha Parimana. According to them, the Atma depends upon the dimension, the Parimana of the Sharira, Indriya, etc. So, the Bhashya begins, Deha asya astidi dehi, tasya dehinaha, dekavad atmanaha, asmin vartamane dehi yatha, yena prakarena kaumaram, kumara bhavo balyavastha, yavvanam, yuno bhavo madhyamavastha, jara, vayo, hani, jirnavastha, ityetaha, tisraha avastha, anyoni vilakshanaha. So Bhashya says. Now, if you believe that this body is only entity, then you have to admit that there is nothing other than this relative entity, and our true nature is somewhat relative. So, just as the body undergoes changes like childhood, youth, and old age, each different from each other. So when we evolve from childhood to boyhood, or boyhood to youth, or youth to middle age, and middle age to old age, and then from old age to death, and then to be born again, these are changes that take place at the level of the body. These changes do not affect Atman. These changes affect only the body. And each of these changes is different from each other change. But the Atman remains totally unchanging, totally unaffected by any of these changes that take place at the bodily level. Tatha tadvat eva dehat anyo dehantaram tasya praptihi dehandara praptihi avikriyasa eva atma ityartha. In the same manner, while passing from one state to another state of the body undergoes changes, but Atma remains unchanging, Atma remains unchanged. Those who are spiritually enlightened, dhiraha dhiman, tatra evam sadi, namuhyadi namoham apadyadi. That being the truth, those who are spiritually wise never worry about these changes that happen at the bodily level, because they know that this body is only just one insignificant aspect of their personality. They look upon these changes as natural phenomena happening at the bodily level. This is the central message of this Upanishad. Bhagavad Gita here is speaking as an exposition, as an interpretation of the Upanishadic statement, that is sarvam khalu idam brahma, sarvam hi atma, etc. Now, these two verses together in a way are related to two important doctrines of Vedanta. One is the principle or the doctrine of law of karma and the doctrine of reincarnation. According to the doctrine of karma, whatever we do, whatever actions we perform, maybe it's a physical action, maybe a word we speak, a physical deed we do, a thought we think, all these will produce one residual impact. Apart from the obvious or tangible, visible result for actions, there is an invisible result, and that's something that we take with us when we travel from one life to another life. So, according to the vrittis, vasanas and samskaras, which are produced by various actions, we take different bodies and we travel from life to life. It's called the doctrine of reincarnation. When we are born again, as I mentioned earlier, we bring with us, we inherit this legacy of impressions, samskaras, vasanas, the results of our actions in previous life. It's called karma vritti samskara chakram in the yoga tradition. and we are born again, we bring this. Then what happens? When we were born again with good samskaras, spiritually healthy or helpful samskaras, compelled by the inherited legacy or spiritual samskaras, we continue our efforts to make progress in spiritual life, in the next birth. So in the Gita itself, in the 6th chapter, there is a famous verse, Tattradam buddhi samyogam labhade paurodekikam yatadeja tato bhuya samsiddho kurunanta. So the body is destroyed with death. But the samskaras and vasanas, the impressions and spiritual characteristics that we produce with this body in this life are born again, and they become our spiritual capital when we take the next life. So Bhashyakara says, when we are born again, we are born with these impressions associated with the former body. Samskaras and vasanas that we accumulated with our body in previous life, with our mind and senses. And this will help us in continuing in spiritual life. Tatra yoginam kuletam buddhi samyogam buddhya samyogam buddhi samyogam labhade paurodekikam purvasmin dekhe bhavam paurodekikam. So those who have done good spiritual deeds, accumulated healthy, good spiritual characteristics, are born in the family of yogis, spiritually enlightened people. And they retain their impressions from previous life, which they had developed in their previous life, the former bodies of paurodekikam. And then what happened? Yatadeja prayatnam karoti. Then they continue the endeavor, the efforts to make more and more progress in spiritual life. Purvabhyasena tenaiva kriyadehi avashopi saha jignasiravi yogasya shabda brahmadi vartate. So, by that previous practice, the spiritual seeker is benefited, and he, in fact, compelled or forced by the strength of the spiritual legacy that the spiritual seeker has accumulated, he continues his evolution, his progression in spiritual life. So this is a spiritual secret which every spiritually wise person understands. Therefore, he remains totally unaffected by the changes happening at the bodily level. Dhiraga dhiman tatra evam sadi namuhyati namohamapatyati. Because a spiritually advanced soul understands these changes taking place at the physical level do not in any way affect him, the real him, because the real I is Atma, which remains unaffected. But every good action, every spiritually meritorious deed that we perform in this life will help us in a very big way to continue our onward spiritual journey. Bhashya continues. Yadyapi atma vinasha nimitto moho na sambhavati nitya atma iti vijanataha tathapi shiroshna sukha dukkha prapti nimitto moho laukiko drishyate sukha viyoga nimitto sukha samyoga nimittaha cha shloka ityetat Arjunasya vachanam ashanki aha. Here Lord Krishna perhaps anticipates a possible question from Arjuna. That's how the Bhashyakara connects the 13th verse to the 14th one. So, maybe for a spiritually enlightened person, this Atma Vinasha Nimitto Moho Na Sambhavati. A spiritually enlightened person who knows that the self, the Atman, is eternal and he is in reality this Atman. He may not have any of these delusions arising from this thought, because he may not have any wrong notion that this Atman will die, the Atman will be affected by the changes that happens at the bodily level. He will be totally free from all these wrong notions and delusions. But then what about the common people, the ordinary people? They may have this worldly delusion arising out of the pairs of opposites like cold and heat. So tathapi sidoshna sukha dukkha prapti nimitto mohu laukiko drishyate. Still frequently we see this delusion coming out of multiple and varied experiences in life. Because life is a continuous journey through multiple experiences, sukha and dukkha, good and bad, pain and pleasure, and so on. So due to these experiences, people may have some wrong notions. So Arjuna perhaps can have these wrong notions. So anticipating such a possibility, Lord Krishna makes a statement in the 14th verse. Matra spashastu kaundeya sitoshna sukhadukkadaha agamapayino anityaha tan tidikshassu bharata. That's the 14th verse. Lord Krishna is addressing Arjuna as son of Kunti, Kaunteya. When the senses come in contact with sensory objects, they produce pairs of opposite results like cold and heat, happiness and sorrow. They come and they go, and they are transitory, they are changing, they are momentary, they are not eternal. This is what you should understand. So you should be able to bear with them. You should practice tidiksha. That is the statement. He Kaunteya matra sparshastu sitoshna sukhadukkadaha agamapayinaha anityaha he bharata tan tidikshaswa. So there are two words important here. One is tidiksha, the other is of course bharata. Sadhaneshu api sarveshu tidiksha uttama sadhanam. This is the statement in the Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Sara Sangriham. So the tidiksha is the highest sadhana, spiritual sadhana. Sahanam sarvabhudanam apradigara purvakam chinta vilaparihidam. Sa tidiksha nigati. It's a Vivekachudamani. Bhashyam himself says in the Prakarana. So the tidiksha, the ability to withstand undesirable experiences without any bitterness, looking upon good and bad, pain and pleasure, with a strong equanimity of mind, keeping the mind in a state of equilibrium. It is called tidiksha. And this tidiksha is one of the most important requisites for any spiritual seeker. This tidiksha becomes natural for a siddha, and it's very important as a means for a sadhana. And another word that is used here is bharata. Perhaps from a grammatical point of view, bha dipto. So the word bha dhatu, its meaning is prakasha or light. So bha is light, prakasha, which means knowledge, Brahma Vidya, Atma Vidya, or Paravidya, that's the meaning. So Brahma Vidya tasyam brahmati iti bharata, that's the real implication, explanation of the word bharata. So Lord Krishna is implying that Arjuna is a sincere spiritual seeker. Now the Bhashya begins. Matraha abhi niyante sabdadeha iti Srotraadini indriyani matranam sparshaha sabdadibhihi samyogaha te sidoshna sukhadukkadaha sidam ushnam sukham dukkham cha prayachanti iti. So what is matra? So sound and all these other sensory objects are measured by these senses. What are the senses? Ear is the sense that measures the sound. So the contacts of these senses with sound, etc. When senses and sense objects come together, they produce effects. Some effects may be good and some may be not so good. So pain and pleasure, heat and cold, all these are the results of the senses coming in contact with sense objects. So we'll continue the discussion in the next session. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.